Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. The show, as most of you know, brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day, the uncompromising libertarian perspective. And I'm joined as I am by every week by my co-host Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's wonderful to be back with you and, of course, our viewers and listeners for another session.
Yeah, likewise. Well, Fed Chairman Janet Yellen is in the news. Her term as Fed Chairman expires in February. So I thought, well, this gives us an opportunity to discuss the Federal Reserve. There's some debate as to whether Trump is going to reappoint her or should reappoint her. So why don't you begin by giving us a little bit of background and perspective on Yellen and the Federal Reserve in general.
Well, let me start with the Federal Reserve. I would expect some of our viewers and listeners to know a little bit about this, but let me explain it perhaps for some new watchers. The Federal Reserve is a little over 100 years ago. It's America's central bank. It was established by an act of Congress in 1913. It's supposed to be nominally independent, a chartered corporation that is chartered by the Federal Reserve, by the Congress. According to its statutes, it is responsible for the management of the money supply, to oversee the stability of the value of our money, and as time has gone on, increasingly to act as a regulatory agency overseeing the financial institutions of the United States, especially the banking structure. Now, the Board of Governors is made up of several people who are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate, like an ambassador going to a foreign country, for instance, or a cabinet position. And basically, in essence, our central bank, and indeed any central bank anywhere in the world, is basically an institution of monetary central planning. The government has a monopoly control over the quantity of money that is issued in the economy. The dollar is not linked or connected in any legal or de facto way with gold or the gold standard anymore. That was ended during Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal period, and the final link with gold, the dollar with gold, was broken by Richard Milhouse Nixon in the early 1970s. So basically we have a paper, or what is sometimes referred to as a fiat currency, as I said, the quantity of which is under the immediate control of the Federal Reserve. Will there be more money created, less money created? Would they actually decrease the supply of money? And all of this is determined by this Board of Governors, who decide what they consider to be in the economic interest of the country, the financial and economic and investment and growth interest of the country. They also control interest rates, not in a rigid price control way when we think of when government has imposed wage and price controls on the economy as a whole in the past, but they have a great ability to influence in the short run a variety of interest rates. Because what the Federal Reserve does, it increases the money supply by going into financial markets and buying up U.S. government securities, that is the government's debt that it has issued to finance its budget deficits. And it pays for this government debt that it buys in what is called the secondary financial markets by basically printing new money. The gist of it is if Jacob Hornberger had a government financial instrument in his investment portfolio, let's say a 30-year U.S. government bond, he would sell that to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve would then write a check to Jacob, just as if you sell anything and someone writes a check to pay for it. And Jacob would deposit that check in his commercial bank, like your paycheck or any other check is deposited into your bank. And they'll credit your account. They would credit Jacob's account. Now that bank will go to the Federal Reserve, and they'll say, look here, one of our depositors, Jacob Hornberger, has deposited one of your Federal Reserve checks in his account with us. Please make good on the check. And they'll hold up the check, metaphorically, obviously, and say, yeah, that's one of our checks. It's a legitimate thing. And then what the Federal Reserve will do, it will credit that bank's account. So every bank has an account with the Federal Reserve. Think of the Federal Reserve in one sense, banker's bank. And so they will credit that bank's account, reflecting the value of the check that Jacob Hornberger had deposited, that the Federal Reserve had issued. And the bank can then meet its obligations if Jacob wants to withdraw some of that money that he now has added to his account, or if it wants to extend loans for investment and other purposes. Now the question is, where has the Federal Reserve got money to make good on that check? They still do it occasionally in the old-fashioned way, printing up Federal Reserve notes, the paper money that is in your pocket, my pocket. But basically what it is in our tech world, a person at a desk, mostly at the New York Federal Reserve branch, sits at a computer screen. He's been told to credit some bank, let's say $10,000, just to pick a number, and he will click the mouse and credit that bank's account by $10,000. And that click of the mouse is the creation. It is literally out of thin air. It used to be thin air in the sense of printing it in dollars off a printing press. That was really metaphorical. But now it is not metaphorical. It's literally ethereal. It's money just created with a click of a computer mouse, and poof, there's money on someone's account on the computer accounts. And then that bank then has created money, which it can extend as loans for investment purposes, home mortgages, car loans, etc. And that additional money is now pumped into the economy and has the potential, when there is a large enough amount of it and over a period of time, to bring about the process of what we call price inflation and distortions in the economy that also go under the name of the business cycle. That's the essence of how the Federal Reserve operates in an admittedly very brief nutshell. Now, as I said, the Board of Governors are appointed by the President with the consent of the Senate. And of course, the most important person in the sense of being setting the agenda, chairing the meetings, sort of setting the policy tone, is usually the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now, I think in most people's lifetimes who are watching or listening to this, the names would be familiar. Alan Greenspan, who was appointed in the 1990s. And then after Alan Greenspan, shortly before the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, when Greenspan's term ended, Ben Bernanke. And then when Ben Bernanke's term ended under Barack Obama, then Janet Yellen was appointed. Now her appointment is coming to an end. And the President of the United States, now Donald Trump, has had his staff vet a variety of possible candidates, including Janet Yellen again, to be reappointed as the Fed chairman. Now, the issue which has come up in the media and the press is, who should it be? Should it be Janet Yellen again? Some people have mentioned an economist named John Taylor, who's affiliated with Stanford University, a number of other names. Now, their policies would be nuanced differently. If I could use a metaphor, imagine that if you're going to get a new king, you could have a benevolent king, or you can have a malevolent king. Now, it's better if the world doesn't have a king. But if you're going to have a king, you'd prefer that he not hit you over the head as many times as the other guy would. So there are options that likely someone like John Taylor would be more cautious and conservative in a, quote, activist monetary policy than Janet Yellen is likely to be if she was reappointed. But the fact is that whoever is appointed, they will be overseeing a version of monetary central planning. And as long as you have any form of central planning, you throw a wrench into the economy. What should interest rates be? That should be the market determining that, like the price of shoes, the price of hats, the price of bananas. It's meant to bring a market-coordinated balance between the decision of some people to save and other people in the society wishing to borrow that savings for various investment purposes. So there's coordination in the use of resources in the present and the time. When there's a mismatch between savings and investment, invariably have over the longer term the phases and the consequences of the business cycle. It also, the Federal Reserve also determines how much money will be in the economy in its process of influencing interest. What should be the value of money? Now, if money was a market-based commodity, like historically in the past, like gold was, then if the market has chosen gold, then and for monetary purposes, and there's a supply. Now, what would be the supply based upon? Well, what's for monetary purposes, for commercial uses, ornamental purposes, right? And there would be a market value, and mining companies would evaluate the cost of prospecting, mining, and minting, and they would see a profit opportunity to mine gold, part of which would become used as money as opposed to other uses that gold has. And supply and demand would limit and check and determine the amount it was profitable to mine and therefore supply in the market. But that would be a market check, because if you increase the money supply too much, even of gold, its value in the market falls. That diminishes the profitability for the gold prospect and mining, and that puts a check on increasing it too much or too fast. But with the Federal Reserve, there is no market mechanism like this. It's the discretionary decision of a handful of people with imperfect knowledge, with many different ideological, political, and elitist motives as to what they think is right for this economy. And their decision as to the money we have, the quantity of it, the interest rates at which we borrow and lend, and therefore the fate of the economy because of the dangers of the boom and bust cycle of inflation and recessions. And so whether it's Janet Yellen or any other person, the crucial question that should be asked is not who should be the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but the more fundamental, foundational one: do we need a central bank? And if not, how do we move, and how quickly we can move to a market-based monetary system outside, banking system outside of government?
Yeah, your point about whether it should be Yellen or somebody else is an interesting one. It reminded me of what Murray Rothbard was once asked during the Cold War about what do we do about communists in the federal government. And he said, just abolish the jobs. And so, we can debate all day long as to whether it should be Yellen or Taylor or somebody else. And as you point out, some are better at managing the monetary policy than others. Some want more inflationary policy. Some want more conservative, less inflationary policy. But from a libertarian standpoint, we don't really involve ourselves in who should run the system when we're arguing you should have a free market system, not a system based on socialist central planning. And I'd like to take it back even further back from where you started talking about it. I want to take it back to the founding of the United States. We're often taught that the gold standard was a system where paper money was transferable to a fixed quantity of gold. That's simply not true. There never was a paper money standard. The framers, our founding fathers, were firmly opposed to paper money. So it was never a paper money system transferable into gold, convertible into gold. It was a gold coin system. That was the official money of the United States: gold coins, silver coins. It was established by the Constitution, which is the framework by which the federal government and to a certain extent the state governments were authorized to operate in. We had a federal government whose powers were limited to those enumerated in the Constitution. If it wasn't enumerated, they couldn't exercise it. On the other hand, the states had whatever powers they could exercise, their police powers, unless they were expressly restricted. So you had two different concepts here on powers. Now it just so happens that the states were restricted with respect to their monetary system. There was an express restriction that the states could not emit bills of credit. Now, what's a bill of credit? Paper money. That's how the term was used back then. And so there was an express prohibition. The states cannot use paper money. There's also an express restriction that said the states shall not use anything but gold and silver coin as their medium of exchange. So the official money was gold and silver coins. And in fact, the federal government was given the power to coin money. Well, clearly coining means gold and silver coins. It doesn't mean making coins out of paper. There was the power to borrow money, but everybody understood that while you had bills and notes and bonds that reflected the indebtedness that the government was incurring, this was not money. This was a promise to pay money, which was a promise to pay gold and silver coins. And that was our system for more than 100 years. A gold coin, silver coin system, to a certain extent copper coins for small change, nickels and so forth. But that was the system, and it truly constrained the federal government's spending Of course, there was no income tax, there was no welfare state, but it constrained the government because in order to spend, the government had to acquire gold coins and silver coins. So when it taxed people, it taxed them in terms of gold and silver coins, but they couldn't go out and print gold coins and silver coins. And that was the benefit of the system from the framers' standpoint. They had seen what paper money had done throughout history. They'd had the experience with the continental currency during the Revolutionary War, where you had that phrase, not worth a continental. Well, all that changes in the early part of the 20th century. You've got the welfare state coming to an existence. The ideas were percolating for the welfare state, the regulatory state, and of course the warfare state, where we were transitioning to an imperialist system, the Spanish-American War, and then into World War I and World War II with the welfare warfare state, which requires massive amount of expenditures. Well, that brings us into the Federal Reserve System, which abandoned the gold coin standard and replaced it with a paper money standard. And there's the famous episode of Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression, nationalizing gold. I mean, he just confiscated through executive order, later ratified by Congress, the official money of the United States for more than 100 years. No constitutional amendment, just by executive decree and congressional legislation. And so everybody has to turn in their gold on pain of a felony conviction. And here we're unleashing the floodgates for massive government spending on the welfare state, the warfare state. And so you have this massive debauchery of the currency, where as compared to gold, the price of gold, the paper money has been debauched decade after decade after decade, and the popular conception was, oh well, this is just an inevitable part of progression in life, that money is worth less today than it was 30 years ago. There's nothing natural about it. It's all artificial inflationary proclivities of the government, as you say, printing money or creating fake credit, expanding money and credit, and in the process debauching the currency. And in the process, all those gold coins and silver coins went out of existence. It was Gresham's law. Bad money, the paper money, will drive out of existence the good money. And so here we are today with a central planning system, the Federal Reserve, which is really a variation of socialism, Richard. When we talk about socialist central planning, and where you have government officials purporting to have the requisite knowledge, what Friedrich Hayek called the fatal conceit, to plan this enormously complex system known as money. And of course they can't do it. There's always the disasters. You've got these booms and busts. It's what brought on the Great Depression, the big stock market crash in '29. We've been taught in our public schools that was the failure of free enterprise. Well, that's only because people believe that a Federal Reserve System is part of a free enterprise system. And that's what brought on the stock market crash, because they were trying to manipulate and plan the proper quantity of money. And so I think what we have to do is stick by our guns in these debates as to whether it should be Yellen or Taylor or whoever. And that is to keep arguing for what Hayek called not just a gold standard, which would be better, like they had, like Americans once had, but really what Hayek called the denationalization of money, a total free market money, where let people interacting in the marketplace decide what the best media of exchange is for their particular transactions, whether it's Bitcoin, gold coins, Citibank notes, or what have you.
Yeah, it's a frustrating circumstance for some classical liberals or libertarians of the type that are the views that we express usually, and that is that the fundamental weak point on the part of many who claim to be free market, limited government, concerned about government encroachments, is this weak spot about the control of the money supply. For example, this fellow John Taylor, a very highly respected, internationally renowned economist, who, as I said, is at Stanford University, is in the running to be the next Federal Reserve Chairman. About 4 or 5 years ago, he published a little book meant to be a popular book called First Principles, in which he espoused the needs from competitive markets, individual initiative, low taxes, deregulation, openness to global trade, all of the hallmarks, and often very well said in a very concise book of maybe 150 pages on first principles of a free society. But he, like many similar friends of freedom in these senses, has a blind spot when it comes to the monetary system and the banking system, because he therefore says, as he's always argued, as far as I know, as a professional economist and as a policy proponent, that there needs to be a Federal Reserve, a monetary central bank that has this monopoly control of controlling and directing and determining the financial sector in terms of interest rates and the money supply. It's a strange anomaly, if I can say, is that those individuals who see the efficacy of individual initiative, the profit and loss system, the role and importance of market competition, often alluding, as you just did yourself, to Friedrich Hayek's argument that the very nature of a complex market economy is that knowledge is divided among people through that system of division of labor by which we trade and associate with each other, and that no one person or group of minds, no matter how well read and informed and wise, has enough wisdom, knowledge, and ability to directly plan an economy from the center. Yet, in fact, that is what the Federal Reserve attempts to do. It is monetary socialism, monetary central planning, to presume that they know better than a competitive market would be what should be used as money, what should be the quantity of money, what that value of money should be through the interaction of supply of that commodity money, such as gold, as I explained earlier, and people's demands and uses for it, and what interest rate should be set by the government as if it's arbitrarily setting a price control of one sort or another, or should interest rates reflect real market conditions and circumstances of the supply of savings and the demand for investment to coordinate this essential activity that not only keeps the economy in balance, but fosters and cultivates the ability for capital formation and economic growth upon which all of our standards of living are dependent? Or do we want to hand it over to a central monetary authority, as we've been having for a century, with these booms and bust cycles, including the Great Depression of the early 1930s and now this recent financial crisis of 08 and 09, that disrupts the entire economy and throws the economy off balance and out of whack, to which then it is a difficult and time-consuming process for people to reorganize and re-coordinate themselves due to the government sending out the wrong signals and bringing about the mismatches which the economy then has to correct for.
Yeah, and an interesting aspect of what you were initially talking about Friends of Liberty surrendering to monetary socialism or other aspects of socialism is the evolution of Milton Friedman's thought in this area. I mean, Friedman was really the leader of free market economics, a leader in free market economics, showing the benefits of markets and the price system and so forth. And then he has this plan for the central bank, for the Federal Reserve to be able to increase the quantity of money only up to a certain point, and he comes up with this enormously complex constitutional amendment that's going to restrict what the Federal Reserve can do in terms of increasing the supply of money. And it's all really a libertarian or a conservative trying to figure out how to be a good central planner. But what was interesting about Friedman is that later in his life, I remember he wrote an essay somewhere, maybe the Wall Street Journal or something, where he says, look, here's my plan for the Federal Reserve. And then he puts in parentheses, but my ideal is to abolish it. And I thought that was really fascinating, because what he's really saying is, look, the best thing we can do is get rid of this thing and let markets operate. But as long as we have it, here's what we should do. And I thought that was an interesting evolution in his thinking.
Yeah, this happened in the years after he won the Nobel Prize in Economics, which was in 1976. He did write that in a popular piece like in the Wall Street Journal, but in his more scholarly publications, especially in 1986 and 1987, he published about 3 articles, one of which was his presidential address at the Western Economic Association in 1985, and it was published in their first issue of 1986. I'm forgetting the exact title of it. But he basically said is that I have advocated a monetary rule. Have a central bank with no gold, just paper money, but rather than giving up to the discretions of politicians and bureaucrats, put it on automatic pilot. It just, the money supply increases by 2 or 3% a year to keep the economy on an even keel. And he says in this presidential address that he has now concluded that he was dead wrong about this, that his colleagues in the economics profession, the public choice theorists, who apply the logic of economics to analyze the political process, have persuaded him that it will never be, either in the short run or the long run, self-interest of politicians and bureaucrats to manage the money supply by any hypothetical standard of the stability of the economy as a whole. Money is so crucial a tool to manipulate things that it will always be open to misuse and abuse and temptations. That means that that type of fiat money rule will never be sustainable and be able to be implemented in the long run and kept away from the hand of the political abusers and paternalists. He then wrote another piece, which I believe was in the Journal of Money, Credit, and Banking that same year, in which he says that looking over the 20th century and how the Federal Reserve has managed the money supply, the Great Depression, the milder booms and busts of recessions and inflations in the post-war period up until that time, he said that now in reflection, it would have been better to have never had a Federal Reserve and imposed the cost of this monetary mismanagement on the society compared to having a decentralized banking system with a gold standard. Now, he ends the article by saying, I'm not advocating a return to it. I don't think the institutional setting of our politics would enable it to function and be sustainable. But looking back, it would have been better if we had never given in to central banking and a fiat money.
All right, well, the leading figures and the leading school of thought in this area really are the Austrians. People like Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, Israel Kirzner, that really have led the way in terms of the understanding of a free market monetary system. And you've written this fantastic book, ebook for FFF called Monetary Central Planning in the State. You can access it on our website. You can go to Amazon and buy it. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Austrian school, which really you present in this ebook, and tell us a little bit about what the ebook's all about.
Right. Monetary Central Planning in the State has two sort of functions as a book. The first part of the book, I attempt to lay out and explain in a thorough but readable fashion the ideas and the policy proposals of the Austrian School of Economics. Those economists running from Karl Menger and Eugen von Böhm-Bawerk in the late 19th, early 20th century, through especially Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, who developed the Austrian theory of money and the business cycle. Having laid out that Austrian theory of money and the business cycle, I then explain and contrast the Austrian approach with Keynesian economics and Milton Friedman's monetarism. The second part of the book is concerned with then, well, if this is the inescapable problems with government mismanagement of the monetary and banking system, what is the alternative? So in the second part of Monetary Central Planning in the State, I attempt to point out the political and economic limits, shortcomings, and uncorrectable elements, institutional elements in central banking, and therefore what should be its alternative or substitute. And there I lay out the case for private, competitive, free banking. Over the last 30 years or so, this has been particularly championed by two notable Austrian-oriented economists, Lawrence H. White, who is affiliated with George Mason University there in Fairfax, Virginia, and George Selgin, who is affiliated with the Mercatus Institute, or Mercatus Center, also at George Mason University. They have reawakened, given rebirth to a lost tradition that Ludwig von Mises had espoused, and that was the 19th century tradition of not having central banking, but market-based competitive free banking, in which the market would determine what is money, how much money, and the coordinating of savings and investment through market-based interest rates. The Austrians basically did a critique, particularly Mises and Hayek, that the business cycle is not something inherent in the market economy. The booms and the busts are not something in capitalism. There's something that is imposed and distorts the processes of the market from the outside. And that is this process that I explained when we began our session today, of explaining that the Federal Reserve increases the money supply. They create the illusion with a monetary expansion that there is more savings in the financial markets than really represent the savings out of income and the real resources that savings is supposed to represent to sustain and maintain investment activity. And therefore investment projects are undertaken with this created money at artificial interest rates of too long a time horizon, a wrong direction, a misuse of labor and a misallocation of capital and other resources, which disjoint and discoordinate the entire network of relationships and sectors of the economy. And when this economy is shown to be unsustainable and collapses, then everyone realizes that they have to re-coordinate themselves, rebalance themselves. What should be produced, in what quantities, at what prices, at what wages, what capital has been squandered, what labor skills have been misapplied. And that's the shakedown in the adjustment period that must occur after the false misdirections and faulty signals of the monetary phase of the business cycle caused by central banking. That is what the Austrians, I believe, have shown with great cogency and insight, and even stronger with historical realism that continues to explaining the circumstances of today. So if one of our viewers and listeners is interested in this thing, and if I can be so immodest and unhumble of saying so, I would recommend my own book, if I can do this. And that is to read Monetary Central Planning in the State, because I believe I present a good teaching outline with great detail of the Austrian approach, the contrasting Keynesian and monetarist schools, and then the case for competitive private free banking.
Yeah, well, Richard, immodesty and humility is one of your longtime characteristics, as you've long pointed out. I mean, you've always told me what a modest and humble person you are. Finally, in the waning moments here, you have another ebook and a video series that you've done for FFF that I think perfectly complements the Monetary Central Planning book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, since I'm expected to toot my own horn today, thank you, Jacob. The other book is Austrian Economics and Public Policy, Restoring Freedom and Prosperity. And in this ebook, again, which I have attempted to write in a way that is detailed, and readable and approachable for any reader, who are the Austrian economists? What were their contributions and their theory of individual choice, the market process, the nature of the economic system? And I developed these first through little biographical vignettes of some of the prominent Austrians teasing out their ideas. Then I apply this to the variety of public policy issues of regulation, budget deficits, monetary and inflationary issues, the issue of inequality, the idea of government being the center of a national purpose for the country to which all of us must conform and within which all of us are to be confined, and the central planning and elitist political paternalism inherent in this. And I hope that in this book one can have an informed introduction to the core ideas of the Austrian school and their relevance and application to the problems of today. And then finally, based upon this book, through my affiliation with the Future Freedom Foundation, there is also a 10-part video series, an introduction to Austrian economics, available through the FFF website on YouTube, in which I lay out the core concepts and ideas of the Austrian school from the founding and from Karl Menger up until the present. And I believe that between that book, Austrian Economics and Public Policy, and the video series, Introduction to Austrian Economics, anyone could have a strong and good handle about the ideas of the Austrians, and then use that knowledge to go out and articulate them to others and defend the free society from its opponents.
Yeah, I think those two ebooks and the video series are the absolutely perfect introduction to Austrian economics. And anybody that reads those two ebooks and watches a video series, I think will know more economics from an Austrian perspective or a free market perspective than most economics professors in the country. So on that note, Richard, we're out of time. I enjoyed the conversation, as always. For people that want to learn more about this particular subject, come to our website at fff.org. Drop us an email. We'll be happy to give you any ideas answer any questions you might have. And Richard, as always, great pleasure to see you, and enjoyed the conversation.
Until next time, and thanks again for the viewers and listeners to spending their time with us.
Yeah, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.